no public forum, nor have we received any apologies. Item 3, I'll move that Council confirm the agenda with following alteration in regard to Standing Order 21.4, option C, be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Councillor Vanavers. I'm assuming you wish to speak.
I wish to add 3 motions.
Item 4, declaration.
And I wish
I can hear something.
to speak to each of them independently.
To which? We're confirming the agenda, Councillor.
Yes, and I'm not wanting to confirm the agenda as is. I'm wanting to confirm the agenda with the addition of the 3 motions that I first tried to have lodged in March.
Your connection doesn't appear to be particularly
tried to have
stable, Councillor. I can't hear you particularly well.
Oh dear. 3 motions, the same 3 that I have been trying to get on the agenda since March, since the lockdown. Motions that you are very familiar with and which have been blocked from this agenda as notices of motion.
I'm finding this somewhat difficult, Councillor, only insofar as I haven't managed to make out any more than a phrase at a time of what you have said. And I don't know if it's a connection issue at my end or at others. If I could get confirmation from Ms. Adamson or Dr. Bidrose, are other people struggling?
Your Worship, it appears someone has a microphone on.
I can hear him plain as anything.
Can I suggest that everyone turns their microphones off other than me?
That would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah,
Shall I try again,
Apologies.
Your Worship? Right. The 3 motions that I wish to add to the confirmed agenda are the same 3 motions that I tried to get put on the meeting in March 31st and subsequently attempted to get on this agenda as notices of motion. So you're familiar with these 3 motions. Would you like me to read them to you now?
They've been circulated in advance, Councillor.
Yes, but they're not on the agenda paper and they haven't been circulated to the public, who I believe may actually be able to see some of this meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. You're welcome to, I mean, the motion has been to confirm the agenda has been moved and seconded, but you're welcome to foreshadow an alternative motion should that vote fail.
You're a beauty. All right, in that case, I foreshadow in the event that the motion to the agenda to what's on the paper and exclude the motions that I've been trying to get into this meeting for more than a month now, I foreshadow that if this motion fails, that the 3 pre-circulated motions, which are 1, that council rates non-payment penalties currently 10% for the next 12 months. Basically, the penalties be reduced for the next 12 months. 2, that the council defer non-essential DCC projects for 12 months, but continue with infrastructure projects. And the 3rd motion is that we change the emphasis of where we spend our money from the $60 million George Street to Exchange project, the $20 million university precinct surface treatment, and the waterfront, defer all of those and use that money instead to spend on infrastructure projects. Those are the three motions that I foreshadow. I wish to bring forward in the event that the motion to keep the agenda as is fails.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers? There being none.
I will second his motions.
That's fine. Any further speakers to the motion to confirm the agenda? I mean, in reply, all I would say, Councillor, is that as I've indicated all the way through this process, there will be ample opportunity for these issues to be raised in discussion of papers that are already on the agenda by way of reports that have come from myself and from the Chief Executive. That they are very broad in scope and enabling of.
Your Worship, the ample
I would appreciate,
opportunity was not available in March. It was not available in April.
Councillor, I would appreciate having the opportunity to speak, and so you have had your opportunity to speak to the motion, and I am responding to it by way of my right of reply and saying that you will have the opportunity to raise those issues should this agenda be confirmed as published through any number of particularly the early agenda items that we have before us. So if there are no further speakers to the motion, I will put it. All those in favour of confirming the agenda with the relevant standing order amendment?
Aye.
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 No.
Those against?
No. Division, please.
Division, please.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope.
There's no.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
No.
Councillor Houlihan.
No.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Raddick.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 11-4.
Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any amendments to the pre-circulated interest register and attendant management plans to add at this point? There being none, I'll move that Council notes the necessary elected members register as attached, confirms the proposed management plan and notes staff members interest register. Do I have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Walker. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 5, confirmation of the minutes. I'll move that we confirm the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of the 24th of February, the extraordinary council meeting of the 4th of March and the extraordinary council meeting of the 9th of March 2020 as a true and correct record. If people are comfortable taking them together. Is there a seconder?
Benson Pope.
Seconder, Councillor Benson Pope, thank you. Apologies, I have a limited gallery view. Any discussion? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 6 is a report from me, and I will move the resolutions as per the order paper. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Staines. Thank you. Just in speaking to into the report, I acknowledge, and I think it's important that we all acknowledge that we live in a very different environment than we did at our meeting in January when we approved our draft budgets. COVID-19 has had and will continue to have a reasonably profound impact on our operations and on our community's social and economic well-being. And so it seemed helpful to me at this, our first public meeting, to bring a report from myself and one subsequently from the Chief Executive outlining what we have been doing in response and what we might do in future as a response to this, particularly as we move into the recovery phase. The recommendations that I have put forward are largely around the annual plan, around remuneration, and then some at the end around grants and the statements of intent for our council-controlled organisations. In order to make the most robust decisions that we can at the end of May, when we enter our deliberations meeting, we need to have the best information available to us. And so this is asking for revised budgets to be brought to council for that meeting, looking at the impacts of our current situation on council's expenditure and revenue, any opportunities that might exist within the organisation for targeted savings, but also how we might raise that money. The average rates rise of 6.5% in the draft budget will now be more challenging for more people. I think that's fairly widely accepted. The challenge for us in response is balancing the needs of the council to continue with our work program and the ability of our community to pay for it. That has to be front of mind, obviously, when we enter into deliberations, and that could mean lower average rates rises. It could also mean increased borrowing. It could also mean other mechanisms to support people who have been adversely affected, whether that's a more generous rates remission policy or whatever. These are the kinds of things that I think will be worth exploring and bringing back to council at the end of May to inform our decisions. And it's also critical, I think, that those scenarios consider the longer term implications of such decisions, not just on the work of council, but on our ability to deliver on our obligations under the Local Government Act to support the economic, cultural, social and environmental well-being of our community, such as the purpose of the Local Government Act. Today isn't a decision-making forum. It would be premature to make decisions about what our budget looks like in the next financial year before we have entered a period over this week where we hear from submitters speaking to the submissions that they have presented to us. All this is doing is asking staff to think a little more laterally about what we spend our money on and where that money comes from to pay for it in advance of the decisions meeting. And just briefly on the other two areas around remuneration, I thank the Chief Executive for her offer of a salary sacrifice through to the end of this current term, her term, not our term, and also that of her executive leadership team who have done likewise. And as I've said previously, the one budget line that we don't have any control over as elected members is how much we get paid ourselves. That is determined quite rightly independently by the Remuneration Authority. I've written to Dame Wild, the chair of the Remuneration Authority, asking for there to be no increase for the coming financial year. And at this meeting, I'm asking for council's formal endorsement of that. The final resolutions are about giving the grants subcommittee more flexibility to support people who have been affected by COVID-19 and are grants recipients. The current rules are quite rigid around by which point money needs to be expended. And also lastly, to extend the deadline for statements of intent for our CCOs, to give them as much time as possible to update them as best they can before they're presented to council. So that's all from me. Further speakers, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. I'm actually just wanting clarification around point G with the grant management policy requirements. We had a recent meeting with chairs of community boards, and they also have their community grants not fully spent out and have been impacted on the COVID-19 as well. Will this policy cover their grants as well, or do we need an additional policy change or additional policy acknowledgement?
These are effectively asking to approve recommendations that have been made by the grants subcommittee. I think the difference here is these are grants that have been allocated but are unable to have been spent, as opposed to what I understand in the community board situation is a pool of money that hasn't been allocated yet. But I would ask the Chief Executive to respond to that if you have a clearer picture.
Yeah, so we are bringing a paper to the annual plan meeting quite specifically to enable the unspent funds from the community boards to be able to roll over and add to their, for you to make a decision about taking the money they haven't spent this year and adding it to their pool for next year when you want to do that. So that will come to you at the annual plan meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you very much.
Ms. Graham?
I was just going to say the same thing, Your Worship.
That's fine, thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just wanted to speak to point G, which was about the grants management policy and the unspent fund. We know that, for example, one of the sectors that's covered by those grants is the arts sector, and as I've mentioned in other meetings, it's suffered an intense blow, as per the words of Grant Robertson. And it's going to be pivotal, that sector and other creative sectors and community sectors for organisations for the social wellbeing recovery of the community. The feedback we've had to date since we advised the organisations that have unspent funds has been extremely positive, and it's going to be pivotal to their existence going forward. So I would commend this recommendation to you all. And as for E and F, I just wanted to comment that acknowledge the leadership shown both by the Chief Executive and the Executive Leadership Team, and by Your Worship and the Otago Mayoral Forum on this matter of remuneration.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervis.
Just to make this thank you for your report, Mayor Hawkins. In your report, under background, section 2, you say that the budgeted rates rise of 6.5% did not include increased levels of service. And yet the $60 million George Street to Exchange surface treatments project has been vaunted and sold as an increased level of service. Is it an increased level of service or is it not? Is it something that actually improves the city or is it not? And if it is an increased level of service, is it not then something which we should consider dropping or deferring at least?
Oh, sorry, Councillor, have you finished speaking? You're on mute. Councillor.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, good. Did you hear my question regarding section 2 of your Mayor's report?
Oh, I did. You can ask questions in speaking to the resolution, Councillor, and I can respond or otherwise in my right of reply.
I have just asked the question and would ask that you respond to it.
Yeah, I will do that during the right of reply. We're in debate, Councillor.
Why are we in debate when we haven't exhausted questions?
The function of asking questions is usually to seek points of clarification from staff of reports that they have written. In this case, the recommendations are from me, and as per how debates are structured, I've spoken to the motion. We're now in debate for people to speak to it or raise questions as they see fit. And at the end of the debate, I can avail myself of the opportunity for a right of reply if I choose.
So are you saying that I've been allowed to ask a question, but that I may also debate later on?
No, we're in debate. So you can continue to use your allotted speaking time now if you choose. And if you want to speak later instead, that's fine, but you can decide that now.
I had assumed that we could simply ask questions first and debate later, but if that's not to be allowed, I will then basically speak to your recommendations now.
Go for it.
I'm quite happy with recommendation A, acknowledging impacts. I'm quite happy with B, staff preparing a revised plan. I hope there's significant revision which reflects the very significant change that many people are in. And I would like at this stage to say that there is something of a myth that I believe has been forwarded regarding how COVID-19 has affected us. And that myth has been promulgated in the media and in various other places, with people saying, we're all in this together. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. There are extremely large numbers of people now who are going to find themselves unemployed and still have all of their normal financial responsibilities and needs. The head economist on RNZ the other day, I forget his name, anticipated that for the first time in New Zealand history, we are looking at hundreds of thousands of people suddenly unemployed, as opposed to historically tens of thousands of people unemployed. And what I would suggest is that the idea that somehow we can make a blunt instrument adjustment to what we do because we're all in this together is a major fallacy. There are winners and losers in every major change, and in this major change, the real losers are those that suddenly find themselves unexpectedly unemployed, with no money coming in, and there are tens of thousands of them due in Dunedin, I believe, with no money coming in. They're not only not going to be able to pay for instance, electricity and rates, especially our increased rates, they are not going to be able to pay for the necessities of life. We, on the other hand, most of us are not in that position. We keep our jobs, we keep our salaries, and many others in Dunedin will keep their jobs and keep their salaries. But we have suddenly now a major split between those that are going to be okay and relatively unaffected and those that are going to be devastated, not just by losing their job, but finding that now society is unable to provide employment for masses, hundreds of thousands of people in New Zealand. So can I suggest that as part of the revised budgets and providing priorities that you refer to, that we look at those that are newly unemployed and treat them in an exceptionally different way than we would treat others. And the two motions which I sought to bring to this meeting, sought to bring to the last meeting as well, would go some way to deal with that. In terms of extending the timeframes for council-controlled organisations to finalise their statements of intent by 1 month, I'm quite happy for that to go forward. I believe that council-controlled organisations may in fact need more than an extra month to extend their timeframes because of the incredibly unprecedented situation that these businesses find themselves in. Regarding the budget 6.5% rates increase, I believe that we should simply scrap it. I believe that the spending that is proposed to keep on going, that is not fundamentally infrastructure, that is to say the $100 million worth of big ticket items, George Street to exchange 60 million, 20 million for the surface treatments for streets around the university precinct project, and the waterfront bridge. I believe all of these urgent need to be deferred so that we have some ability to direct this funding to infrastructure projects instead, and also to recognise that our rate take, our fees take, our income generally is going to be very seriously affected by the sudden increase of unemployed people that we have here in Dunedin. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I just have a couple of comments around Section F, actually, the remuneration, and I first off fully support the letter you sent to Dan Wild. I think we can all put our hands up and say that was a very wise gesture from us. I do have an issue though around the CEO's reduction in pay. I find it rather strange actually that the CEO is offering to take a pay cut in the context of COVID-19 when her workload has increased exponentially. In essence, she is financially punishing herself for bending over backwards for the city. And let's not forget, she did request not to take a pay increase for the year from November 2019. That said, I'd be much happier with no reduction and for her to donate the 38,000 or a similar amount to local food banks or people working suicide prevention like Life Matters, or any groups that are helping Dunedinites fight the effects of COVID-19. And to be clear, I have no issue whatsoever with individuals whose workloads have diminished somewhat significantly due to COVID-19 taking reductions in pay. But in the case of our CEO and in fact the executive team, that is clearly not the case. But if they do want to make a gesture, I just think the gesture could be put to better use locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I absolutely 100% agree with what Councillor Walker said. And in actual fact, I've told the CEO that myself. I personally wouldn't have been wanting her to take a cut anyway. Her had to work as essential workers, risking their own lives and their family and partners. And they've also been working far more hours than normal, some of them doing 18-hour days. I mean, I think we've got to respect not just our senior management and our CEO, but all the essential workers that are out there working for our city, and they've done an amazing job. And their families are at risk because of that, and so are they, and I really appreciate that. And I certainly would vote to give our essential workers, which our CEO and our senior management are, a pay cut at this time. I'd actually be increasing it, but that's just my opinion. And I would also, if they do want to give some, I would make it voluntary and let them give it to donation of their choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
It's a bit different doing it this way. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to endorse pretty much most of what was in this report from you, and acknowledge that the DCC as landlord is doing the right thing, because there are businesses hurting there that are our tenants, and I'd love to see other landlords following suit. I also endorse the free parking for essential workers. That's fantastic. And the lead that the CEO has taken in taking a pay cut, though she is working extra hours, is just, I suppose, acknowledging the hurt out there of people who have actually lost their jobs. So I just congratulate Sue on her lead there, and I support that we too should be demonstrating or modelling that we're willing to take some of the cost ourselves by saying we don't want a huge pay increase. I really like point 14, where there's possibility of further support from the government being announced between now and May regarding infrastructure-led projects, and I really want to endorse that. Dunedin has got an amazing opportunity to actually look at what infrastructure-led projects we could get funded through the rebuild stage. And I just, I suppose, encourage that, just like the PGF, that there's a resource given to this, because I know that, in fact, to get these things up and running and put in applications is actually a huge job. And I congratulate those who have already done the work over Easter to put in the capital projects they've already done. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Worship. I want to speak about your report and support the comments that people are making in general, but I have a procedural issue that you might like to think about or take some advice about. I'm just concerned that about timing. We know that we've been more fortunate than some other authorities because we'd already advertised our annual plan. We're about to embark on hearing submissions tomorrow and so on. And so I'm concerned when I hear people such as Councillor Van der Vis did issuing unequivocal views about matters yet to be heard and debated. And I wonder if you would like to make any comments, or staff would like to make any comments about whether that puts people issuing views of that kind about matters yet to be heard in a public process at risk in terms of predetermination when we get to those hearings.
Would you like me to provide some advice, Your Worship? He's gone, he's gone.
Yeah, I think he froze, so I suspect he's logged on and is coming back.
So shall I hold on that advice just till he gets back, I think?
I think he might want to cover it in his right of reply.
Okay. If I can just hear the mayor next door, I'll go and see what's happening, but it seems that he may be trying to look at a way of seeking an adjournment while he sorts out his technical problems, but I'll be back in a second.
I think I'll go and put the kettle on.
Maybe some clarification provided about community boards and if funds carrying over into
Your Deputy Worship.
Yes.
With the mayor absent from the chair, it falls to you. I'd suggest an adjournment for 10 minutes while we work out the technical details at this end.
So I'll move a 10-minute adjournment. Do I have a seconder? There we are. Councillor O'Malley, thank you. So I'll leave you somebody.
Worship, you need to, your Deputy Worship, you need to vote on that.
Certainly. Those in favour?
Aye.
So do we just leave put our mutes on, Ms. Graham, and leave the cameras running? Yes?
Yes, and the GSO will exit you all and put up a note that says we're in an adjournment for 10 minutes.
Yes.
So that will be just before 10:02, am I correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, if no one else speaks now, it will, that's what it will be. So
1:47.
thanks, Jules.
Do we leave now till 10:02? Is that what's happening?
I am.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Go make a cuppa.
The mayor is having issues.
With his laptop or?
He's left.
Lynn can go on and unmute.
The meeting has adjourned for 10 minutes.
while I understand that we are unable to resume the meeting before 10 to 2, in my technical issue, I've lost what I did have by way of a speaking order. So I've got Councillor Benson Pope, who was unceremoniously dispatched with by my technical shortcomings. But if others yet to speak wish to, if you could add yourself to the speaking order, that would be helpful. Thanks.
So you saw my granddaughter the other day. That was the first time in 6 weeks I'd seen her, and she's only 4 months. So it was really, really lovely, and they stayed the night. So it was cool. We had a good catch up. So we've now got an extended bubble.
Councillors, if I could just remind you all that when you can see this view, live streaming, just to be aware.
By which view you mean what?
Sorry, when we are in a view where you can hear each other and you can see one or other of your colleagues, it means that we are, when you've gone from the waiting room to this kind of format, depending if you see a single view or a gallery view, we are live streaming.
Thank you.
So not time for personal catch-ups.
You can, of course, if you want to share them with your citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. It's 10 minutes to 2, and apologies. I've found both a more stable internet connection here in Gigatown and a more flattering camera angle. So it's a win all round. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. Did you hear the content of my question before I talked about the matters in your paper?
No, if you could traverse that again, that would be helpful. My apologies.
Okay, I'm just concerned at a procedural level, given the timing of the hearings on our annual plan starting tomorrow and following, and the fact that we're all expected to hear those submissions without prejudice and predetermination, and then make decisions about whatever it might be once we've heard those arguments and submissions, that it might be appropriate for some advice, or for you or Ms. Graham to consider some advice to colleagues about compromising their ability to participate in that process when they make unequivocal statements of objection to whatever it might be, or support of whatever it might be, as part of this discussion today, because it would seem to me that's displaying clear predetermination which would rule them out of participation in that process. And once you've thought about that, please, I do want to make some comments about your recommendations.
Thank you. Did you have anything to offer in the first instance, Ms. Graham?
Matters of predetermination need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. But broadly, members need to bring an open mind to hearings. So it doesn't have to be an empty mind, but it has to be an open mind, and they have to be prepared to take into account the views of their community before they make decisions when it comes to deliberations at the end of the month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That meets my need. I mean, clearly Councillor Vandervis' comments didn't demonstrate that, and so whether he's predetermined or not will be for others to decide. I'd like to talk about your paper now, and I'd endorse the majority of speakers' comments on what you've suggested to us. It's entirely sensible. It fits with the process issues that I'm concerned about, and it means that no one is restricted in any way from having their view registered as part of the public process. And then when we finally deliberate, no one will be constrained in any way in what they might say, provided they're not already ruled themselves out, of course. I just have a question about item E, though. First of all, I think I'd like to endorse...
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order, Councillor Vandervis.
Councillor Benson Pope has made accusations about predetermination and used my name in the context. Advice from Sandy Graham has been that we need to take a community responses into account. I don't believe it's appropriate for Councillor Benson Pope to single me in this context. And I understand, and Sandy Graham may be able to correct me on this, that if I am representing already public opinions, then I'm perfectly entitled to discuss them in a public meeting.
What's it say there? The red cameras for you.
So can you repeat what the point of order?
When they talk, they normally come up, and now I got me.
The point of order is that Councillor Benson Pope has made an unwarranted personal attack on me regarding predetermination.
Fantastic.
I am of a mind to take advice from staff in advance of making a ruling on that, which is more problematic to do in this realm than it otherwise would be in a meeting. So I guess I would ask that we adjourn the meeting. You can all stay here and I can seek governance advice and return and make a ruling on that.
Thank you.
Councillors, we will adjourn for a short time, and it will come up on YouTube. So if you'd like to either leave the meeting for a few minutes or just keep mute, please.
Welcome back, everybody. Firstly, what I would say is that I would caution councillors from making definitive statements about decisions we will make in our deliberations meeting at the end of this month in advance of hearing from submitters who are presenting to us over the next few days, and indeed those who have presented feedback in writing. Having said that, though, I'm not, better be important. I'm not satisfied that in this case, Councillor Vandervis I don't think his remarks have met the threshold for predetermination, and I would ask Councillor Benson Pope to withdraw his.
You're asking me to withdraw what, Your Worship?
The comments you've made around Councillor Vandervis's predetermination in our budget making decisions.
Well, speaking to that issue, Your Worship, I did hear a number of unequivocal statements about things that he wanted to cut from the budget. So having made the point and displayed the risk that I will in due course complain about if I need to, I'm happy to withdraw in the interim.
Thank you. You still have the floor, Councillor.
Yeah, I want to endorse the support that people have made in respect of the comments that people have made in respect of the offer from the Chief Executive. But I also wanted to ask about your item E, because I'm aware that there was opposition to this, but I'd like you to confirm or not my understanding that the response from councillors to your letter when you asked for support for that letter to Fran Wild was overwhelmingly supportive. Is that the case?
I can address that in my right of reply, should it require a reply.
That's fine, thank you.
Further speakers, Councillor Houlihan, you have spoken. Anyone further? No. Yeah, I mean, just in addressing that point, while I certainly didn't receive responses from all elected members when that letter was pre-circulated, the responses that I did receive were overwhelmingly supportive, but not unanimously so. And at that point, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour, and I'll take it by division.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Raddick.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Aye.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. I've got a motion from Councillor Walker, I believe.
Yep, thank you.
I'm happy to second that, Your Worship.
Yes, I'd just like to move a motion around the item I was discussing earlier around the CEO's pay. So I'm happy to read that out now, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'd like to move that the CEO does not take a 15% reduction in her remuneration, but instead donates the equal amount to a number of local charities doing work to alleviate problems associated with COVID-19.
That's that is clear enough what it is that you are trying to achieve. It is directly countered to a motion that has just been approved unanimously by council. So you could seek the leave of the meeting to repeal that, which would require, from memory, a 75% majority of members voting. But I see Ms. Graham furiously searching her standing orders. It would have been tidier dealt with as an amendment to the resolution, but it's not insurmountable at this point.
Sorry, Your Worship, I did have my hand up, but obviously technology doesn't. Yeah, it's apologies.
And it does require a 75% majority of members present to revoke something that's already been passed at the same meeting.
Does it require a revocation motion specifically, or is the new motion enough to achieve that?
Actually, Your Worship, as much as I hate to say this, we probably also potentially need to take a quick adjournment because the revocation or alteration at the same meeting has a number of prerequisites, none of which I think are met in this situation. But I'll have to check.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, we'll see you all again soon.
The meeting is adjourned.
I believe we need a process and a vote to adjourn a meeting. And I believe that it should be specified how long that adjournment is going to be.
I move that we adjourn the meeting for 3 minutes.
Seconded.
Seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
Thank you.
That's agreed.
Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you, everyone, for your ongoing patience. The issue here is that standing orders are quite clear around what the bar is to allow for even a debate on the revocation motion. Specifically, it requires new facts or information to have come to light that might have otherwise influenced the earlier decision that's made. And it's hard to see how this proposal satisfies that. It would have been best dealt with as an amendment to the original resolution or foreshadowed as a motion. So
I'd like a point of order at this point, please.
Point of order, Councillor Raddick.
Yes. I call a point of order because at the calling of the motion to be put to accept this report, Mr. Mayor, you had failed to spot Councillor Walker's hand up. I could clearly see it, and therefore that we took the motion in error. We should go back to that point, back to prior that point, so that we can hear the comment he was attempting to make.
Thank you, Councillor. It's not a point of order, but I take your point, the issue here being that Councillor Walker had already spoken in debate and wouldn't have been able to speak again at that point. It is unfortunate, but here is the situation that we are in. So it's item 6. Item 7 is DCC's COVID-19 response. Dr. Bidrose. Anything from you, or you're happy just to take questions?
Oh yeah, actually I am pretty happy just to take questions and take it as read. I think most of you are aware of what we've been doing.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Gary.
Dr. Bidrose, can you just outline the ways that Dunedin City Council, the way that we've responded to COVID-19 and prepared for COVID-19 has been used at a national level as a template for other councils?
Yeah, so some of our work, we had a really good fit for purpose set of business continuity plans, which included some overall pandemic thinking. Our audit and risk committee had been particularly strong in us getting this in place, and that meant that when the pandemic hit, we were probably in a better position than many in terms of our business continuity and in terms of being able to address the issues of how we did the pandemic transition. So right at the beginning, we pulled together a list of, before the government had alert levels, we created our own set of alert levels. We called them alert level 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. They ended up mirroring pretty closely government's levels 1 to 4. And we had a meeting just before the lockdown was announced, actually in Wellington, where we went through our level 4, and Society of Local Government Managers, Department of Internal Affairs, NEMA, the Civil Defence Agency, and a few other agencies all got together. Our template ended up being used as that agency picked that up and used that as their starter for 10 in developing the nationwide guidance, so that there was some consistency. My concern had been that if one council closed libraries and another council had open libraries, we'd end up spending energy that we should be spending getting out of the pandemic. We'd end up spending arguing about whether libraries should be opened or closed. And I was pretty keen we have a nationwide set of guidelines, and that recommendation got picked up. Then when it came to going to alert level 3, we immediately, as that work started in Wellington, we started on our planning for, by then we knew we had alert level 1, 2 and 3, 4. We started on what we thought the differences would be for alert level 3. And we sent those up to Wellington, and they then became the national template for alert level 3. So that's been quite pleasing to see that, you know, we've been well a bit ahead of the game in some cases, but certainly we feel like we've had really pretty good input into the national decision making. And as you might imagine, we're currently working on alert level 2, and alert level 2 has got a particular focus on, obviously we all, at the point at which people can shop and go to cafes and return to the CBD, we're pretty keen that people do that reasonably quickly. So we're looking at how we can ensure safe social distancing in town. I mean, you've all seen George Street on days where the footpaths are packed, and obviously physical distancing requirements are be maintained throughout level 2. So we're starting to do some thinking about how we operationalise that locally, and some of that's been discussed around the country as well. There's been a suggestion from Councillor Barker, which I particularly liked, that we do a survey of our businesses and we canvass some of our main street retailers' views on things that would help us promote and help get people back into town. And Mr. Christie has said he really likes that idea. He's going to pick that up straight away. So we should be doing that over the next few days, so that we can be doing everything we can in order to assist those businesses get back on their feet. And that all is predicated on people coming back to town, knowing that they can shop safely and that we want them there, and we do things, put things in place in order to make that a safe thing to do.
Councillor Barker.
I have a question about, I know we've been talking about rates relief. I wonder if you have any idea of the numbers of how many ratepayers and how many businesses have asked council for rates relief?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've already got a policy which enables businesses and residential ratepayers to come to us and ask to have their rates deferred. Generally we allow that to happen where there's good reasons. Where there's no arrangements made, we charge penalty fees and interest, and they can mount up, and that's an undesirable situation. We've taken the policy that we've got and applied it really rigorously to this situation that we're in, and said we are going to take a very community-friendly approach to rates deferral, to rates repayment deferral. So at this point in time, we've made that public. We did some ads in the paper and out over social media, and we talked about it on the radio and so on. The number of agents that we've had, I can't give you the exact number, but it's less than we anticipated. It's modest. But there have been businesses that have been in touch and that have said they want to come to an arrangement with us to defer payment. So at this point, we're looking in general to say, listen, okay, you don't pay anything for 6 months, potentially, depending on individual circumstances. Some agencies, some companies want to pay a bit, others want to defer, and we'll come back to them at that point in time, and there'll be no interest, no fees, no penalty fees of any kind, as long as you get in touch and make an arrangement with us. And we have we've done a proactive mail out also to businesses to say that this is available. Please fill in this portion of the survey and get back to us. Send this bit back if you want us to ring you about needing rates deferral. So we're trying to be pretty proactive about identifying those businesses so that we help them as much as possible. This seems to be pretty common around the country. In terms of council's balance sheet, it's not actually too problematic. It's a problematic from a cash flow perspective, but we can deal with that, because we end up with not collecting the revenue as quickly, but we also end up with a debt owing to us on the balance sheet, and those two things balance each other out. So financially, it's more doable for us than it is for some other businesses to make these kind of arrangements. And so we haven't had to come to you with policy decision about that. We already had that policy. It's just that we're expecting a lot more people than usual to use that policy at the moment, and we are taking a very supportive approach to how we deal with those requests.
Councillor Vandervis.
Thank you for this report. Chief Executive Bidrose, your Falul Street 30 and 31 paragraphs. In 31 in particular, we're talking about a possible hotel development. In 31, you say the process has been put on hold in the interim and the 4 groups notified of that. What interim period have the 4 groups been advised of? How long are we putting this on hold?
Partly that will be a little bit, well, that's over to you. At the moment, we've just said it's on hold because none of us are in the building and progressing it. It's worth noting, though, that at least one of those businesses has said they are very keen to proceed. So it's just worth noting that it may, that the current set of circumstances isn't being seen by everybody as a death knell to tourism. In fact, there are some agencies that are seeing this as a real opportunity. So we'll come back to you as soon as we are back in the building and get in touch with them and look at how each of them wishes to proceed.
So when you say that the 4 groups have been notified of the interim deferment, they haven't been given any indication of how long that deferment is going to be?
We've had discussions with them all about under the current circumstances, we can't progress, and they were all accepting of that and look forward to getting back in touch with us.
Thank you.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. A related question. Congratulations on how that policy has been applied and how timely it was. Do we have any information, Dr. Bidrose, around whether large or other property owners in the city have adopted a similar approach? Or can we find that through the chamber or elsewhere?
This is the approach we've taken to offering rent relief to our commercial businesses. We've offered it pretty. We've got clauses in our policies that say if you can't access your premises, we won't charge you rent, and these circumstances definitely trigger that. My understanding is the approach is mixed, but I don't think that any of the. I'm not aware that we have any coordinated intelligence gathering on that.
So we have no information whether, for example, the owners of, say, the Meridian have adopted a similar approach or have clauses in their leases that are similar.
No, I certainly don't have that, and I haven't heard John say that he knows, and I don't know if the chamber do. I would be surprised. Maybe.
Okay, thank you.
They might be able to ask, but
it would be useful to know, wouldn't it? Thank you.
Further speakers? Oh, sorry, we're still on questions. Questions of the Chief Executive? No. Well, I've sent around in advance an amended version of the resolutions included on the papers. And my intention is to move that the report be noted, but secondly, to request a paper to come to the Planning and Environment Committee meeting that explores options for encouraging a greater use of our city centre when we're in a position to be able to actively encourage more people to use it in a way that manages the transport network more safely and further makes advances on community groups who may be inclined to support a similar approach in suburban centres. That's been sent around in advance of the meeting. I don't know if we have the capacity to share that on the screen, but potentially could have that copied and pasted into the chat. Ms. Adamson, if people, here we are. Here's the resolution in tiny type. That council request a report to the next Planning and Environment Committee meeting on 1, temporary options to encourage people back into the city centre while ensuring safe physical distancing, including free retailer use of footpaths, traffic calming measures and shared spaces. 2, how council could approach local communities to see whether they wished to request neighbourhood slow speed streets and other centres and suburbs for the purpose of safe physical distancing and shopping or recreation, noting that 3, any such measures would be designed to take effect for the duration of alert level 2 or until physical distancing was no longer required. That alongside the resolution per the order paper on noting the report. Do I have a seconder in the first?
I'd be happy to second.
Seconded, Councillor Staines, thank you. Firstly, to the report itself, I thank the Chief Executive and her staff for the extraordinary amount of work that they've put in over the past couple of months, not just in terms of adapting to new ways of working, and we're all adapting to new ways of working, but in supporting both the organisation and our community through the emergency response. We're fortunate, I think, in the city to have such a committed public service, and it really comes into its own, I think, in situations like this. But my proposed amendment really is around how we support the city through the response period and into the recovery stage. And what I'm asking here is that we look at how we manage our transport network in a way that actively supports our economic recovery, because we want to be encouraging people to come into town and go shopping, but we also need to make sure that people can do that safely. And as has been mentioned by the Chief Executive, some of our pedestrian spaces in the city centre are particularly narrow and don't allow for that particularly easily. There are a range of options available. My list is not intended to be exhaustive, just suggestions of things that could be actively considered around around temporary reductions in speed limits, shared spaces, traffic calming, those sorts of things. But most importantly, I think this could also allow our businesses in the city centre to expand their capacity by taking up more footpath space than they currently are able to, because the streets would potentially be safe enough for all road users to use. So you'd be able to walk around a greater number of cafe tables quite easily. I couldn't support making a decision on this at this meeting. I think it needs more of a response and more of an appraisal by our staff. So I'm asking this meeting to request a paper to come to the next committee round that does just that, just outline some options for what we can do, and all things going to plan. The committee round will coincide with our transition to alert level 2, which I think is the point at which we can more assertively recommend to our community that they should be availing themselves of the services being offered by businesses in our city centre. I just think we need to balance that with some thought around how we help people do that safely. The second part is just around providing options for local community groups in different parts of the city, should they wish to identify options that would work similarly for them to support retail activity or physical activity in a way that people can keep apart from each other in the current physical distancing climate. Just acknowledging that there are more there is business activity outside of George Street, and in some of those suburban areas, these could also be options that support businesses in our suburban centres. That's all I had to say. Councillor Raddick.
Yes. So you did draw attention firstly to the transportation network. And the critical thing in our transportation network is that the highest level of citizen dissatisfaction has been expressed to do with central city parking availability. And the second highest level of citizen dissatisfaction in the recent citizens poll of end of 2019, the residents' opinion poll, was on-street metered parking availability. So to that end, I would like to ask the CEO a question. Is it possible to remove the parklets that are taking up several parks in George Street at the moment? And then I'll continue from there. So I think it'd be good to have clarification on that. Firstly, Dr. Bidros.
Yeah, you have approached me about this a couple of times. As it happens, the parklets are being removed, actually. They're being removed for the primary reason being there's been quite a bit going on around the country about the kind of infrastructure that we put in, which encourages people to sit around in little groups and have huddles, if you like. I've noticed on the television when they've done video clips on the news out of Auckland and things like putting emergency closed plastic tape across park benches and the like, because we don't really want 3 or 4 people sitting on a park bench, so we're looking at that. The parklets have been designed to create little social spaces on the main street, and that isn't healthy in the current climate. So we will be taking those away, and they will become 3 car parks again.
Sorry, I missed that last word. Was that today?
No. Well, I think this week, but before we get to alert level 2, before we want people to start. So when people start coming back into town, we won't have those little huddle places for them to sit around in small groups within that too close space from each other.
So there will be an increase in some car parks. That's great. And 3. Okay. So given that our citizens are very keen, are most dissatisfied about car parking, I think it would be useful addition to your request for a report. If we can include a line, either just tacked onto the end or put in as a separate line item, if we could increase Central City car parking at all in the interim. So what, do you think that's feasible?
I'll ask the team to give it some thought. Part of the issue, of course, if you're talking about increasing the parking on George Street, you're immediately taking away some of that social distancing space that you're potentially making available. There have been some reports coming through about the availability of parking and kind of lack of visibility. If you drive into Queenstown, there's big signs saying 40 parks in that street and 20 parks in that street, and we don't have that. And the vast bulk of the time our parking is not actually full. It's just we don't have good real-time advice for people coming into town about where we do have empty spaces, and in particular our car parking buildings don't necessarily feel very user-friendly sometimes. So I'll ask the team to have a look at that. They'll have to weigh those things up, but I'll ask them to look at that when they do the report.
Okay, so
as they're starting to pull this together.
Okay, so my request then that we put in something to do with optimisation of Central City car parking, which could include signage to direct people to where the parks are.
You would have to raise that as an amendment to the Mayor's motion. I'll allow the Mayor to pick that up. But just so you know, I'm happy to tell staff to make sure they're doing the thinking whether we change the motion or not, because obviously thinking about how we get people into town and the survey is going to cover those similar issues.
Wonderful, thank you. And so, Mr. Mayor, could you just simply add that into your motion, or do I need to raise it as a?
You can raise it. You can raise it as an amendment, but you might want to draft something so that people know what it is that they're discussing.
Yes. Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Hi, I was sort of going along that line too, in the sense, not about the parking, but I think in the amendment, we should be looking at the major stakeholder, which is the retailers. And I endorse Sophie's statement that we need a survey of central business as to what ideas they bring to the table, giving them the information so that they can put their ideas forward, because I think it's at this time that they're struggling and they're stressed out. They need to be completely involved in this process, because otherwise it's just going to make them feel unsafe. So I would endorse that there was a survey of central business owners to bring their thoughts to the table.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to pick up on some points in the amendment first, and I certainly support a paper coming to us in Planning and Environment to explore those possibilities. I think one of the things we need to be careful of is unintended consequences. But as we started this meeting, and I take your point about the wider community and things that we can do to help with the physical distancing. I had an approach from a community member just as we started this meeting around issues with the walkway cycleway in some parts of it on the peninsula where the barriers are too close together and cyclists cannot easily move out of the way of walkers. So I think people in the community have a really good idea too of the things that will help, and I totally support canvassing retailers in the central city to get ideas. But I want to turn to the report in a wider sense and just say that I have a real sense of pride in the way that Dunedin City Council's led the way. First of all, being proactive in terms of our preparation for the pandemic and then in our response. We've been ahead of the pandemic in so many ways, and we've been used as a model for other councils throughout the country. And I applaud Dr. Bidrose, her executive leadership team and staff First of all, for their inspirational and strong leadership at this pivotal time, for keeping the various teams safe and communities safe, and particularly for those who delivered the essential services. And it's a real sense of pride in regards to that. And I've had lots of feedback from the community around that. What people may not be aware of in the wider community is the long hours that the staff worked to ensure that the community was kept safe, and also to be responsive to this unprecedented situation, and how staff were redeployed in many instances to other roles, which they hadn't done before, but as was required, and they stepped up. So there's a real sense of pride. And on top of that, the team who turned their attention to welfare as part of the civil defence response. So I just want to acknowledge that work and say a very sincere and heartfelt thank you to our leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for doing a report considering business, helping our business centre. I think that's great. I do have some questions around it. Just with the regards to where it says sort of slower cars and things, are you envisioning a little bit of pedestrianisation there, or what are you thinking?
No. This will all come to you for the fine detail, but as far as I'm aware, pedestrianisation isn't on the cards here.
I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased to hear that, because
but you'll get it in the report, Councillor Houlihan. But I think they're talking about shared space, so shared slow space for everybody. But you'll get it in the report next week.
Right.
They're just going through the options.
I just didn't want to see us inflaming, people in the Octagon and Central City that have already had a stressful time with the trials. So I'm delighted to hear that. But
no recommendations to remove parking either. That I haven't heard anybody suggest anything that might be contentious like that. This is not the time to do contentious things. The idea is to be really encouraging to get people back into town.
Oh, I know. I mean, all good intentions. I think that's great. I just wanted to check that. I also think that that we really do. It'd be great if we talk to businesses in the Mayor's report. I think his ideas are very good. However, I just think it is essential that we talk to the businesses and find out what they want. A lot of those businesses, as we all know, they're really hurting. And I'm really concerned also, obviously, for all of them, but the ones who won't be able to properly operate in level 2, I'm really concerned about, like, for example, hairdressers and beauty therapists. I used to be a beauty therapist in years gone by, and I really sympathise, because, I mean, they can't, if you've still got to keep a metre apart, that means they can't, well, as I see it, if that's the case, I don't know how they can operate. So it's businesses, all of them are hurting, but certainly ones like that, I think, is a major. And I really also want to congratulate the council for looking at this brilliant idea of doing a business directory to help support businesses. And I also hope that which I think we acknowledge the businesses that have already set up business directories, and I praise them for the innovative decision to do that. There's 3 of them, I think, who are doing some really amazing stuff in those business directories, and I think that's fantastic. And while this has been very hard on a lot of people, there are a lot of opportunities in times like this and a lot of innovation. So I look forward to our city helping to encourage that innovation and moving forward positively.
Thank you. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. I'm just concerned about the process. Is there enough? I'm entirely supportive of what's being recommended. Is there enough time to get it to either of a report of this, a useful report on these matters, to either of the committee meetings next week? Whether it's infrastructure or P&A is irrelevant, but is that doable?
That is probably a question for staff around the capacity to turn a report around in time for the committee meeting.
That's the question.
We think it is. We're talking. The options that have been thrown around are all relatively simple. So yes, we think we can get something to you that outlines that.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Vandervis.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree, Mayor Hawkins, that we want to encourage people to come into town and to go shopping. And I pick up Councillor Raddick's point that most people will come into town to go shopping in a car, in a nice safe bubble, and that we need to ensure that there is appropriate parking available, and that after the parking that there is appropriate physical distancing. However, I think that's doable, and I'm glad to see that we're going to get a detailed report on that. What I am not so sure about is the second most usual way that people will come into town to go shopping, and that is in a bus. And I have a number of questions which I hope the report will actually address. First of all, physical distancing in a bus. I mean, I've heard buses referred to as COVID coaches because there is no physical distancing between you and the driver as you get on. Is it possible, for instance, for the driver to have a screen? Is it possible for the air conditioning in a bus to be filtered? And on those rare occasions when there are more than one or two people on the bus, is it possible to maintain physical distancing amongst passengers on the bus? So in terms of looking at this transportation issue, I believe that cars very easily fit the bill and the requirement for a safe bubble to come into town, and we should encourage cars as much as possible. Buses, however, seem to me to be a vexed problem, and that for people who can't afford a car, perhaps we might even consider subsidising cheap taxi services rather than buses to get people into town in a way that doesn't compromise the distancing that's required. A point that Councillor Elder raised regarding a survey of central businesses that she called for, I don't believe that we do need necessarily to survey central businesses, since they've already surveyed themselves with a very well received petition organised by Mr. Weatherall. I think they've got something like 5,000 signatures already. Mr. Weatherall has already got the ear of most of the central city CBD retailers. I don't think that we necessarily need to start surveying central business retailers. We simply go to the survey that has already been done and ask Mr. Weatherall to be a conduit to the other retailers that have been party to that. So in short, very supportive of getting people into town. Much easier to do, I believe, by car than by bus currently, and would be interested to see what the effects or what can be done to reduce the effects of becoming infected by being in the enclosed situation of a bus. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
It'd be interesting to see how those 5,000 people are going to park in the 35 parks on George Street. But what I was actually wondering was, would it be better if we went to the Infrastructure Services Committee on the Tuesday rather than the Thursday, given that a lot of the road controlling stuff sits in that committee? I'm easy one way or the other.
Yeah, Councillor, it's less about delegations and more about how long it's going to take to write the paper, and the extra 48 hours staff have indicated would be quite helpful in that regard.
Okay, cool. Otherwise, I'm very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, I want to add my praise to the work that CEO Sue Bidrose and the DCC staff have done over the last 6 weeks. They have done an amazing job covering so many issues off. You know, the city is functioning as well as it is thanks to the efforts they have put in with many, many others. I do note that in our 1 o'clock briefing today that we had no COVID cases in New Zealand in the last 24 hours. And I believe we haven't had any in the southern region in 14 plus days. I am sort of concerned about what we're reading here and seeing here, in the sense of when we look at the pathway where we're going in regards to what this process is trying to fix, when we're actually wanting to get moving the city back to actually level 1 and actually out of any levels as the government may see fit. And we actually don't have to worry about 1 metre distancing or 2 metre distancing. But the part that I'm sort of looking at is that, you know what, I can support this if it's not going to hinder traffic movement and accessibility for anybody to the CPD. But the way I'm sort of interpreting the Mayor's motion is that there will be some hindrance in place. But I'll look forward to seeing the report next Thursday. I'm also conscious that that we do see a budget allocated to this report next Thursday, and also noting the fact that we are heading into winter months, when actually we do get a lot less pedestrian traffic, and the joys of sitting outside and noting out my window how big grey clouds are about to come through and the temperatures dropped. The fact that I don't think there'll be too many people who are actually walking down George Street today, even if we were back to a normal environment. I also hope at the same meeting that we will get an update on the Octagon and the closure of the Octagon and the impact on businesses. So, because unfortunately with everything going on, that has been delayed. But here we are conscious looking at a pathway moving forward, yet we're actually still haven't focused or dealt with things we've done in the past. Anything we can do to support business and strengthen businesses in the CBD and in the regions is going to be important for the city. And I will support the motion in the sense of looking to see what comes forward to the Planning Environment Committee next week.
Thank you. You've got Councillor Elder and then Councillor Walker.
So do we vote on the amended modified resolution, or does it need a seconder?
No, there hasn't been a formal amendment.
Oh, okay.
I think it's probably more usefully dealt with as a subsequential motion.
Okay.
So long as it's not counted to the debate. But I mean, the suggestion was that we amend the existing resolution, and I'm not comfortable doing that.
Okay. Right. Because Jules has sent through a modified resolution. Have you seen that?
Yes. And the suggestion was that we modify the resolution that's been proposed. And I'm saying, as the mover of that, I'm not comfortable doing that.
So then it just needs to be an amendment then.
Someone could move an amendment, or it could be dealt with if it augments the existing work that's being requested by council. It could be moved as a subsequential motion after we've dealt with this one.
Okay, because I was going to move to amend your motion, and that was a survey of central city business owners plus Dunedin citizens for their thoughts and ideas about how to bring the people back to the central city, because I think that is essential for a group of people who are really quite scared right now.
Councillor, before you speak to the amendment, the staff have given an undertaking that will inform the work that is happening anyway. So I guess my question would actually be whether it's necessary or not. But I mean, that's not that's a question for you to answer, not for me to answer. But if you want to move that as a formal amendment to the resolution, now would be your chance to do that.
So, and I was also backing up Jules's options.
Councillor, are you moving an amendment to the resolution?
Yes, I will.
And the amendment is?
A survey of central city business owners plus Dunedin citizens for their thoughts and ideas about how to bring people back to the central city, because I believe it's critical to engage.
Is there a seconder for the amendment?
Is that the amendment finished though? You're going to put in options to improve central city parking?
Well, the two of you can organise what it is that you're doing, but I've had an amendment proposed by Councillor Elder around a survey of businesses. And I'm asking whether that, which is work
I'll
that is
second
currently
that.
being done by staff. Councillor Raddick, would you like to speak to the amendment, Councillor Elder?
Why I'm putting it out there is because if you think about where retailers are right now, they're in basically post-traumatic stress. They're in a really hard place, and I believe it's critical at this juncture to be talking with them, giving them good information and consulting with them how we go forward, because they are feeling quite unsafe. And part of the process we have to do is actually, one, give them the information about the choices they've got, and two, to talk to them about their ideas so that they feel like they've got some sense of input and control, because at the moment they don't feel like they've got any control of what's happening to them. So it's about respecting where they are at psychologically and getting their input so that they feel like they've got some sense of control and determination as to what happens.
Thank you. Further speakers to the amendment at this point. Councillor Raddick.
Yes. Speaking to Councillor Elder's amendment, I think it's, I mean, Councillor Vander has pointed out that there's a survey of 5,000 business owners. It's not a survey, but a petition, but that's all, that petition is speaking to what they don't want. And I think it'd be very instructive for all of us to hear from the Central City retailers, people working in those shops, and general citizens of Dunedin in a very snappy little survey to find out what they do want, to find out what positive suggestions and useful ideas that they may have from all manner of far reaches of their imagination as to how we can improve our Central City. And that, because it's on a time frame and it's a very short, snappy survey, they'll have to come up with what they've got immediately, so it won't be a long protected process, and therefore I thoroughly endorse the idea of putting out a rapid fire survey.
Thank you, Councillor. There appears to be a spectrum of understanding of what this work would entail and how detailed the work would be. So I think, I mean, bearing in mind we're asking for a report to come to a committee meeting that is next week, it might be useful to ask the Chief Executive what indeed is possible in the time frame that we are setting ourselves.
Thank you. Look, we could do a I've talked to John, we could do a very simple, while I've been here, we can do a very simple survey of the main retailers in the main street that simply says, do you have any good ideas of things that we as council could usefully do to encourage people back into the CBD? The minute you start talking about doing a survey of the entire city, doing a survey of it gives people a chance to feel like they're taking back control. These things are considerably more complicated and considerably more detailed, and that we could not do in a week. If you're talking about a simple survey we can get from the chamber, we can get their retail group, we've got a relatively easy way of going out and finding the people to ask, and then we'll need to talk to, you know, an official survey person about, is this nice and tight? Surveys, there's no need to be more than one question here, and I'm a little concerned that our immediate inclination is to make this all things for all people and incredibly complex. You cannot do a useful survey like that in a week.
No, it was
so
more,
just leave it to us to do something really simple. Then
it was more
underway. We've started doing it. John started talking to people about the question already.
Further speakers to the amendment. Councillor Raddick, you're done. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I do support the original motion as sent round by you, although it's becoming harder to support as the amendments accrue. I just wanted to thank Dr. Bridgerose for the robust report and just talk a little tiny bit about to what Councillor Gary and Wiley alluded to when they spoke. And I just want to say from my perspective, that the response to the COVID-19 situation by the DCC under CEO Dr. Bidrose, for me, has been nothing short of miraculous, to be honest. The calm, well-mannered business continuity planning, the establishment of the DCC COVID management plan, not to mention, that, of course, the DC civil defence function, meant that Dunedin was well ahead of the game in terms of making sure that we maintain DCC essential services while also taking care of staff welfare, of course, including them working from home and remotely. Communication with us as councillors from day one was exemplary. And I think we as a city should be extremely proud of council and all of its staff and their hard work and dedication during a time that has been tough, if we're to be honest, on all of us. Things, of course, are likely to get harder before they get easier. But if we continue to work together in the best interest of the city and its residents, Dunedin can come through this crisis and be in a position to take advantage of some of the opportunities likely to develop in the coming weeks and months. So thanks once again, Dr. Bidrose, and to your team and all the council staff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're speaking to the amendment, which I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the shared understanding of what it is that is being requested. And I've asked Councillor Elder to write something so that people know what it is that they are debating and voting on. I've got Councillor Lofiso and Councillor Houlihan speaking to the amendment.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to take this opportunity to add to colleagues' thanks and praise to Dr. Bidrose and her team, both the senior leadership team and the executive leadership team, for all the mahi and hard work beyond the call of duty, if you like. And I am not going to be supporting the amendment motion, simply because I think that in the discussion that we've already had, and with Councillor Barker's suggestions already made, and the Chief Executive's response and saying Mr. Christie has already started working on the survey, I feel that the amended motion advanced by Councillor Elder and Councillor Raddick is superfluous. And I just would like to make the point of view from my perspective and my background, if you like, that long before the lockdown, there was already a so-called underclass suffering from this economic model that we've been that we've had imposed on us for a number of decades. So, you know, talking about, I know that business people are a valuable part of this whole, but they're not the only part of the whole that are doing it hard. And these people, the people that I'm in touch with, were doing it hard long before the lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I think it is getting a wee bit confusing. There seems to be a lot of amendments going on here, because Councillor Raddick put out an amendment, and now I'm not sure whether we're debating Councillor Elder or Councillor Raddick's. I'm a bit confused, to be honest. But anyway,
I can help you if that would be useful. So at the moment, we're debating an amendment by Councillor Elder that she is yet to draft, asking for a survey of businesses to be included in the work being done, informing the report that is coming to next week's committee round.
Okay,
So
I've received that.
Motion pass.
I've received that email. Also, prior to that, Councillor Raddick sent through an email that said exactly the same thing. So that's why I was a bit confused. But anyway, that's fine. Thank you for that. I do have a concern about a survey going to businesses, because I actually think right now things are so extraordinary that a lot of people will be just getting by and just surviving, and to stop and fill out a survey and think, what do I want? Right now, they might not even be able to think clearly. And I don't think that's the approach, personally, I would be recommending. my recommendation would be that if we've got some staff or even some councillors, I mean, I'd be happy to volunteer my time as well, is to go, I mean, to do something like that, but to go around and just say, how are you? What do you need? And have you got any suggestions for what, you know, might help this area? And to me, that's a more personal approach and then they might say, oh, look, and it might give them time to share things that they really needed to get off their chest as well. And we might also be able to jot down some of those things, see a pattern that's reoccurring with a lot of the same people, and also help them, you know, we might be able to give them some advice that could help. So that's my feeling, is perhaps when people are so distraught, they can't perhaps always think clearly, and just that personal approach might be better. But look, whatever we can do in that time, I understand, but I do think priority has to be on how we can help and care for people in hard times. And I want to just say, with regards to what Councillor Lafaso said, she is absolutely right, and businesses are finding it tough, but some of those people, some people in our communities, the most vulnerable, don't even have a home. They can't pay the rent. They've lost their job, and you know, it's people who are unemployed already are really hurting, and we know that, we hear that. So that's why I think it is essential that as a council we get the city going as quickly as possible to help motivate and create jobs and opportunities.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
I sent an email earlier suggesting that we do a survey, and what I perceived was quite a down and dirty survey that would only take 24 to 48 hours and possibly be 1 or 2 questions. I was getting into detail. I support surveying businesses, and I'm comfortable with the staff feedback that we've had, both from CEO Bidrose plus also from John Christie, about the actions that they're looking to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Further speakers to the amendment, which has now been circulated by Councillor Elder, that a survey of Central City business owners for their thoughts and ideas on how to bring people back to the city.
I'll just make one small comment.
Councillor Raddick, you've spoken to the amendment. Further speakers? No, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Aye.
No.
That
Aye.
carried.
No.
Thank you. So we move back to the substantive motion.
Yeah, no, furthermore, I'd like to raise another.
Councillor Raddick, you've spoken to the substantive motion, and to raise an amendment to the resolution, you need to have not spoken in debate. So you would need, like as I said before, you can foreshadow something as a subsequential motion, which you have done already. So don't worry about that, and we will get back to. We can get back to that once we have finished dealing with this.
Right. Unless somebody else wanted to raise a motion of parking. But...
To the substantive motion. Councillor Benson Pope, your hand is up, but I think you've already spoken.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to speak to the amendment, but it's no longer relevant. Thank you.
My apologies. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to agree the sentiments of some of my previous speakers that have just spoken to this, and just complimenting the CEO and her staff and all the staff really for what's happened over the last week period. It's been unheard of times in our time. It's been quite exceptional circumstances, and I just think we can be very, very proud of our staff, starting from the top right down. So thank you.
Thank you. I shan't prolong things any further by taking a right of reply. I'll take the vote by division though.
Okay, Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Barker,
Aye.
Councillor Elder,
Aye.
Councillor Gary,
Aye.
Councillor Hall,
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
I'm not sure what we're voting on, sorry.
This
We're voting on the
motion.
You can.
Which one though?
Are you asking for the motion to be restated, councillor?
Yes, is that, yes, please, thank you.
Ms. Adamson, if you could bring up the resolution on the screen, that would be helpful.
2 seconds. Sorry, I'll just be 2 seconds. This is the new added one.
What is on screen is in addition to the resolution on the order paper to note the Chief Executive's report.
Yep. I'm doing it.
That's important.
Please let me know when you're ready
Go for it.
with the voting.
Please resume.
Councillor Houlihan,
No, sorry.
Councillor Lafiso,
Aye.
Councillor Lord,
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley,
Aye.
Councillor Raddick.
This is,
The amendment's not enough.
amendment's not in there.
The amendment has been passed, but you're right, it hasn't been copied and pasted into this document.
So is it included?
Yeah.
The amendment was passed earlier, so that's why it's not in this resolution. Councillor Raddick,
Oh, yes, aye.
Councillor Stain,
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis,
Yes.
Councillor Walker,
Aye.
Councillor Wiley,
Yes.
Your Worship,
Aye.
carried 14-1.
Thank you. So, Councillor Raddick,
Yes.
your subsequential motion is what?
We add a further clause to the resolution.
That would be an amendment. You need to move a separate motion at this point.
Okay, I would like to move a motion that the council requests report to the next Planning and Environment Committee on options to improve central city parking in order to assist the economic recovery of the retailers therein. Did you, how does that sound?
That's fine. Well, it sounds
Happy to second.
audible. It's been seconded. Would like to speak to it, councillor?
Yes. As councillors may recall, I mentioned earlier today that the highest cause of dissatisfaction of the citizenry of Dunedin is in parking, central city parking, and the traffic snarl ups that they have. Now, I think it is I've observed that it's a fact of life that people want to retain their own autonomous transportation devices. And in fact, I perceive that every person present on this call does use motor vehicles to get around on a regular basis. So one way or another, they get in a car and get taken or drive themselves somewhere at various times. And so I don't think that our citizens are ready to change from that behaviour, and especially in this current COVID time of contagion, we don't want to be sharing public transport and in close proximity to other people either. And one of the strongest grievances that the central city retailers have is the lack of parking in and around their businesses. So I think if we were, as has been suggested earlier today and at other occasions, to come up with some options to improve central city parking, which might be optimisation of signage, so that people knew when there were parks available in some of the parking buildings and some of the parking spots that they cannot see when they drive down the main street or in the proximity of the central shopping area. That would encourage people to come to town and shop and give people the confidence that they can come and park in the town to get their job, get their messages done before, and therefore they're more inclined to come shopping. So,
Councillor Riddick, do you have that written down?
The motion?
Yeah.
It will take me a few seconds, but I can do it very quickly.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
I didn't want to interrupt the councillor, but I'm concerned given that we've already got a council direction to staff on the books to return an update sooner rather than later on the parking figures for our information about exactly this issue, and also a long-term commitment about real-time parking information in the city. It seems to me that this motion is actually out of order, given that we've already got a request for information that will enable us to make rational decisions based on information about central city parking.
So the suggestion is what? The existing council resolutions around the parking study work and others that are informing the central city plan work make this motion redundant.
That's what I'm suggesting, because some months ago, we asked for a complete rerun of all those occupancy and other on-street and off-street figures. That's due to come back to council. And so apart from the fact I can't imagine anything useful could be achieved in the short term for either meeting next week, this work is already in hand, and it would be a lot more useful and informative to us if we had information rather than speculation in the short term.
Okay, thank you. I'll move that we adjourn the meeting for the next 3 minutes to take advice on the issue that the councillor has raised.
Yes,
I have a seconder for the adjournment. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I make a comment at this point? No.
The meeting is adjourned, councillor. We'll be back shortly.
It's adjourned.
Goodness gracious.
Thank you. Welcome back. I would ask Ms. Graham for some guidance to the council.
Thank you, Your Worship. And the adjournment discussed with the Chief Executive and through her with Simon Drew. And there is a parking paper almost complete that is planned to come to council on the 25th of May, on the meetings beginning the week of the 25th of May, which will answer the issues raised by this amendment. And it is in response to the pre-existing council resolution. It feeds into the work on the Central City Plan in George Street. That would mean that this amendment it probably shouldn't be accepted because there is already an existing council resolution that deals with the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Reddick, are you satisfied that the work being done while not meeting the timeframes of your motion is adequate to meet the purpose you intended?
Yes.
Can you? I guess I can rule the motion out of order, or we can move a procedural.
Withdraw the motion. How's that?
That requires the leave of the meeting. All those in favour of withdrawing the motion?
Aye.
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 Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 8. Annual plan and 10-year plan process update. Ms. Welcome. And Ms. Graham, you're happy to take the paper as read?
We are, Your Worship, and I've just, Tammy has joined us. If there are any questions that I can't answer.
Fantastic, thank you. Questions of the report? Councillor Barker.
I have a question around some of the council strategies, given that we're going into the long-term plan and that our role is really around governance. A lot of the strategies are out of date. I think there's about 5 that are pre-2014. And I was wondering if as part of the work stream that bringing all of those strategies up to date might be part of it.
Yes, our workshops have been slightly delayed because of COVID. But you'll see in the next few weeks a series of workshops, starting with some of the strategic ones, as we work through the delivery of the long-term plan leading up to Christmas.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just would note on page 17.26 that you might want to add Connecting Dunedin as one of the big project sets of work we're coming up to. It's not in that list. That's all. There's a short list of these are things that we're considering that are quite large.
Right. And by connecting, do you mean the shaping future Dunedin transport or whatever that thing's called?
Yeah, the future Dunedin. Yeah, Connecting Dunedin is a committee, I guess. It's the future Dunedin transport, whatever thingy. Yeah. Basically, the substantial works around transport in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Your Worship. Forgive me because I read this a couple of days ago, but I just want a clarification from possibly the CEO around decisions from council of our shovel-ready projects, because obviously that would have those decisions by government would have impact on the annual plan.
Yeah, so we'll be bringing those through to you as we get them over the course of annual plan deliberations. Some of them are just about changing timing, some of them are about adding budget to existing programs and so on, and some of them affect next year's budget, and potentially some will affect the following year. So we'll just be bringing those forward to you as we start to get some clarity about what's going to get traction and what isn't.
And if could I just add to that, it may be that the government's timing is such that they don't form part of this year's annual plan. So they're more likely to be part of the long-term plan. But again, we're reliant on the government's timing. So we still have to go ahead with the annual plan as we have.
Sure, thank you very much.
Councillor Lofiso.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the report. And with everything you've got else going on, I'm referring to page 19 of the order paper, the summary of considerations, the Māori impact statement. Now, I'm just raising this for the benefit of myself and Councillor Elder, who are always hassling the staff about consultation for tangata whenua. I understand from the 10-year process, 10-year plan process, that there's a hui held. What's the actual Māori specific process for annual plans, please?
Traditionally, we use the Māori Participation Working Party and take guidance from them. And also we've been working this time strongly with Okaha, and we also have Rachel Wesley, who is now on board. So we've got a stronger sense of the needs of our Māori communities now than we probably ever have.
Thank you.
No further questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations or otherwise? Move Councillor Staines. Seconded Councillor Gary. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Staines?
Not at this time, Your Worship.
Thank you. Speakers. Councillor Van der Vis.
I'm concerned, especially with the annual plan process update, that it simply doesn't address the major changes that have happened in the last 2 months. The annual plan update is basically a budget. The process assumes that we're going to get most of the income that we've had in the past, and it assumes a whole lot of other things which I think have changed entirely. In terms of the income that we can expect to get in the next year, rates income is definitely down, and it may be significantly down depending on how extreme the hundreds of thousands of unemployed that the country is facing, how extreme their situations are. Fees income is definitely going to be down. Landfill income, we know, was already down last year. It's not going up. It's probably going down further as well. We've had confirmation today that rents from DCC tenants will be going down. Some of it has had to be basically cancelled. The ability of our council-controlled companies to pay dividends has plummeted. It was abysmal anyway. We haven't had a dividend in 3 years, and we don't have any on the horizon. And we have $100 million in extra debt budgeted for each of the next 3 years, a significant chunk of that being required just to keep Aurora functioning. So we've got massive reductions in income on all fronts. We've got increasing debt and increasing liability, especially with Aurora. How can we hope for the annual plan to continue as it was, given all these massive change? I don't think that the process update that we have in terms of recommendation is viable. I don't think that the real impacts of the COVID, especially unemployment situation, has really hit home. And I don't see anything in this annual plan that I think is even remotely affordable over the next year. The 10-year plan is not something that I think we can even rationally think about currently, because it's too far away and so much will change in the next year that affects that it's not even worth trying to get into. And regarding recommendation B, that notes that Local Government New Zealand and Solgan guidance for the development of the annual plans is based on independent legal advice, I would look at that quite differently as well and say, although there is definitely independent legal advice from Simpson, Grierson there, that the guidance from LGNZ and Solga is not based on that advice. They've simply used that advice to make what I consider to be a unviable recommendation that simply complies with the law. the idea that we can keep spending at the rate that we have, the idea that we can keep spending on the things that we have been spending.
Councillor,
case of...
I've afforded you some latitude in discussing what is a paper outlining the process of public consultation around the annual plan and long-term plans, not the contents of it. So I would ask that you focus your comments on the paper at hand, which is how we are having this conversation and how this work is developing.
I appreciate that you don't like the direction that my speech has gone in, Your Worship, and I take your direction that I should limit it to very much to the process update that the recommendations call for. I have said most of what I want to in terms of why I think the process is simply not appropriate. And that is that it's essentially about a budget, and that budget doesn't exist anymore. To pretend that the budget is still there, and to pretend that we can carry on, and to pretend that we can consult meaningfully in a situation where we don't have the rates, the fees, the landfill income, the rents, the ability for CCOs to pay dividends. We don't have any of that anymore. To pretend that we do and to keep on going, to me, is completely unrealistic. And for this reason, I'll be voting against both A, which is the process update for the annual plan in particular, and B, the LGNZ and Solgum guidance, which I don't see as guidance at all. I see it simply as bureaucratic self-preservation in the face of enormous changes in what actually really drives the economy. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. I would just add that nobody is pretending like nothing has changed, which is why Council voted earlier in this meeting to ask for revised budgets to be brought back for consideration as part of our deliberations meeting. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to comment on the process in particular and to say that never has it been more important that we have a calm, careful and considered process as we go through this annual plan. Of course, there's going to be further changes by the time we get to the deliberations, and we've addressed that in our previous motion. We are going to need to be nimble, and we're going to need to be open to further changes. I have great faith in this process. I thank the staff who prepared the report, and I look forward to further updates.
Councillor Staines, your right of reply.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in terms of a change in budget, we have asked for one. Our residents, having read through the submissions and are about to enter the hearings, it's pretty clear that they understand we will need a different budget. And that is exactly what we will do as we follow this process. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against? No recorded, please. You're on mute, but we can pick it up. No record. Councillor Vandervis's vote against. That is agreed. Item 9, proposed Trade Waste Bylaw 2020 and proposed Stormwater Quality Bylaw 2020. Mr. Dyer and Mr. Drew on their way into the meeting presently. Welcome, gentlemen. Any comments in opening that you wish to make, or you're happy to take the paper as read?
In terms of a change in budget, we have asked for one. Our residents, having read through this.
The ghost of Councillor Staines' past is haunting the machine for only surrealist reasons, I can only assume. Mr. Drew and Mr. Dyer.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that. My YouTube must have been about 5 minutes behind you.
Good to know. Are you taking the paper as read, or do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, we'll take the paper as read.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the report, guys. It's quite long and large. It's very impressive. I've just got on page 51 the charge for truck tanker waste, and you're going to basically certify everybody now to do that. Is there going to be a mechanism in such a way that it's not going to be prohibitive to get that certification, given that a lot of these tanker, you've got an example there is stock truck effluent, that these guys have not had to have any certification before, so we'll be adding a requirement now to them. Are we going to try to make that cost effective so we're not putting basically effectively a large charge on these people?
Yeah, so any technical elements of that certification will be in line with industry standards, stuff that they already typically have. That'll just be, we'll be taking further steps to ensure that we hold a record of it and are discharging our duties in that space. The other part is will be around funding and ensuring that we've got accounts set up properly and the ability to bill appropriately, but that won't be onerous.
Great. I noticed you mentioned the stock floods. Do we even have any stock truck effluent dumps in the city's boundaries?
Yes, I think there's 3 within the city's boundaries.
Okay.
We also have recently started accepting waste from outside of the city boundaries as well. So Clutha District Council doesn't have treatment plants that are capable of receiving that waste and treating it appropriately. So we've been accepting that.
Great. Now my next question's on the biochemical oxygen demand section, where you're saying that you're now going to make basically everybody with a trade waste license have to comply in some form or another, whereas I think a lot of times people beforehand were thought to be below a threshold. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it is correct for our tier 1 trade waste discharges, not all trade waste discharges. So those that are producing and significant industrial waste will need to measure that rate.
The way I read it was you were planning on making everybody, could be reading it wrong, you were planning on making everybody now register for that, even if they were a low user.
Can you reference the page, Councillor?
52. Looking for it now myself.
My understanding, Councillor, is that the treatment plants have capacity to deal with a whole lot more BOD than it did before, and it was more about raising limits and allowing more of it. We had some quite strict criteria previously.
So it's got the other way around then. You're actually going to reduce the requirements, because I must have read it wrong then. Okay, I'll just I can follow it up with you later on that if I have to.
Yeah, it's more about changing the maximum limit. But yeah, I can talk you through it offline if you like.
Okay, that'll be easy to talk offline. And the other one was basically acids and bases. I didn't see them anywhere in the list. Are we checking the pH of the stuff going in?
Yeah, pH is a requirement of the trade waste consents. Yep.
Okay, cool.
And there's a range that they've got to be within, and some industries pH correct, and some don't need to.
Some dilute or something. Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you for that. Thanks for that report. And I agree that the quality of our stormwater and wastewater do need to be updated with current practice and regulations. One of my questions was the outcome of this. Could it be that, for our own monitoring of our own waste, is increased budget to put in mechanisms to deal with that?
Are you referencing, so for instance, if city property was a trade waste discharger?
Yes.
Yes, but I would expect the changes to be minor.
Okay, yeah, that was just a question. And in the past, you've talked about your relationship with the people concerned. Can you tell me a bit more about that, how you relate to all the people who do these, the commercial properties, etc.?
So we have 2 staff that actively manage all of our trade waste customers. So the more significant, significant industrial discharges, some of them get visits weekly, and constant dialogue around the state of their waste and therefore the resulting charges. And then our less risky discharges get much more infrequent contact, but on the whole, I think our customer base is reasonably comfortable with how things run.
Yes, because I've heard that before, and I think I congratulate you on that good relationship and that partnership. And I was just commenting related to your survey.
Is it a question, Councillor?
No, it's not. It's a comment, so I'll reserve that for later.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Staines?
Just a question around the proposed stormwater quality bylaw. Is that linked to trade or commercial, or is it for all users?
Both.
So in the past, it was housed within our trade waste bylaw. Therefore, quite easily, customers would determine it to be linked to the trade only. But we are proposing to split it out to give it coverage for the rest of the city.
So this would mean that residents who had hard surface areas would not be able to wash their cars on the hard surface area.
That would be a practice that we would discourage, but probably not actively, not actively manage in terms of enforcement. So we'd be looking at education campaigns and the similar things. But for a more significant commercial car wash, for instance, we'd look to use the provisions of the bylaw more formally. So the bylaw doesn't specifically set out that enforcement approach, but it's something we'd look to strengthen as we go through consultation.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
We are aware that MPI certify all stock trucks for the cartage of stock and effluent, and the biggest problem I think we have is some drivers don't always use them, the effluent disposals.
Yes, we're aware of that, and then we're aware of the cartage of bulk stock truck waste, and that's the thing we're looking to manage through this bylaw. But yeah, the management of stock truck effluent generally sits with outside of the jurisdiction of this bylaw and the Three Waters Group.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Mr. Dyer. Very extensive and very detailed. It certainly proved to me that Three Waters team circulates in a very convoluted world. I have 3 questions. Obviously, a lot of what I can ascertain here is about getting better compliance. So, can I just ask, currently, is there an ongoing and real problem with compliance currently?
Yeah, so we regularly have discharges from trade waste customers that affect the operation of our wastewater treatment plants. So that effect can be material to our discharge consents as well. So occasionally we get an influent that comes in and that results in an effluent that goes out that's outside of its resource consent conditions. So often we'll report 99% compliance, and a lot of that is because of both rainfall events, but also some trade waste discharges not complying. So typically we try and charge for those sorts of things fairly, and this bylaw allows for that. On the whole, our customers are pretty good, and the educative approach that sits within the bylaw or that sits within our enforcement approach to the bylaw means that typically we get things under control. We have had during this period of lockdown, we've had an experience that's been quite surreal for our wastewater treatment plants. So they, with a lot of trade waste discharges not operating, the influence been really consistent and easy to treat, and we've had really good results. So that kind of proves the benefit of the bylaw. If we get the bylaw right, we can potentially manage all of that influence more appropriately and therefore get a better result for the environment.
Gosh, okay. So in that sense, COVID-19 has been a good experiment for you guys. And yeah. So my second question then, leading on from the first, is, and you don't have to answer this specifically, but how often are discharges prosecuted?
We haven't prosecuted under this bylaw, not in my time anyway. I don't believe we have ever, but we do often penalise with quite significant charges, which is the main tool for ensuring that customers meet compliance.
Okay, thank you. And my final question relates to option 1A, where one of the disadvantages that is cited is that this clarification may surprise some dischargers who do not realise that their discharges to the stormwater system are unlikely to be complying. You can give me some examples, because as a layperson, it seems rather extraordinary that somebody would be surprised that they're discharging.
Yeah, I think an example might be for instance, a refrigerated truck lot in Kaikoura Valley that has a large concrete pad that parks a lot of significant vehicles on it, with the occasional spill of things on loading and unloading and other bits. And if that were to be tested at the downstream end of their stormwater outfall, they might find that discharge is non-compliant. And there are simple things that they could do, simple practices that they could undertake for nominal costs that would mean that might be brought under control. So a lot of our approach early on will probably be around that education and ensuring that we bridge that gap of knowledge as quickly as possibly, as painlessly as possible for everyone.
Great, that sounds encouraging, and that's a very reasonable approach. Thanks, Mr. Dunn. Thanks.
Thank you. Would someone like to move the recommendations as outlined on the order paper?
Yeah, move.
Moved Councillor Hall, seconded Councillor Elder. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Hall?
No, thanks.
Further speakers? Councillor Elder.
I really like the report. It's very well written and it's clear why changes need to be made. But I also want to comment that the bylaw submission form, I believe, is a really good consultation document because it gives people plenty of chance to make comment and put ideas forward as well. So I recommend it, and it'll be interesting when the hearings come through what happens. So thank you for that comprehensive report, and also the survey, and well done on having a pretty good relationship with your trade waste people.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's good to see these coming through, and it's also good to see that the bylaws are now being separated out. Really, what I'm seeing here is an elevation of the importance of stormwater yet again from where we were 150 years ago, when basically sewer and stormwater were mixed together. We're slowly but surely coming to the point where we're treating our sensitive waterways in the city with the respect they need. And obviously to do that, we need a bylaw that gives us the teeth to do that. It also, I think, will play an important role in educating the public, because as was already mentioned, sometimes people are accidentally discharging into the stormwater system, not knowing what they're doing. So I welcome this advance with these two bylaws coming out as separated packages, and look forward to the consultation period.
Thank you, Councillor Reddick.
Just make a quick comment echoing that of Councillor Elders, that I'm impressed with the survey. I think it's a very useful and good quality survey where the questions go yes or no, but yes with amendments and neutral. So it's very quick for people to answer and then conjure some direction out of their thoughts as they go through it. So that's good to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, your right of reply.
No, I haven't. No, none so up.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. In future, it might be easier to do that by a show of hands than a show of voices, if you like. For the sake of our governance support team, I'm going to move that we adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes and return at 5 to 4. Seconded, Councillor Elder. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. See you soon. Catering has been supplied in your own kitchens.
Who do we send the bill to?
The meeting has been adjourned.
Welcome back, everybody. Item 10 is the proposed continuation of the roading bylaw. Mr. Drew, excuse me, Ms. Sargent. Anything to add?
No, just noting that the report was tabled in February with some discussion around definitions. So staff have updated the bylaw so that the definitions are consistent with the Land Transport Act. That's basically mean we've just removed the term footway, which is an old definition that's not used very often. Other than that, happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Benson Pope. You're on mute, Councillor. I'll do it for you.
Okay, is that all right? Yeah. Just on that, thank you. And that seems sensible to align that with the other statutes, those definitions, but given the conversation we had where there was contradiction, can you assure us though, please, that that alignment doesn't create any issues in reducing in any way our capacity to accept non-standard whatever incursions of any kind, as is the case in Stafford Street, which looks like it's been sorted. We're not creating any more problems for ourselves by what we're doing.
No, changing the definitions doesn't change. It's still the same situation. So the road reserve carries its own legal requirements around it. So as an example, a chorus or Aurora can put a service in the road reserve from boundary to boundary. That's including the road and the footpath. That doesn't change by aligning the definitions with the Land Transport Act. And there'll still be an ability to waive some of those requirements. Generally, some of them can be done through the regulatory subcommittee and some of them can be done through staff. But there's a process to work through if we want to allow some of those things like at Stafford Street.
That's fine. So I wasn't so much interested in requiring authorities, but I was concerned about the people who are using their own money to put appropriate flower installations in the streets, or the issue around the Stafford Street door and stuff. That's not constrained. There is a process. We have the capacity, if we choose, that remains.
Yes.
Thank you.
No further questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations?
Happy to do that.
Moved Councillor Benson Pope, seconded Councillor Walker. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. I acknowledge that we've changed the definitions at the front of this bylaw, but my concern, and I'm just hoping that as we play it out, it doesn't play out, was that the actual body of the bylaw was written based on those definitions at the start. We haven't done much in changing the body of the bylaw, noting that like fences now have effectively moved 1.5 meters closer to the road as the bylaw was originally written, because they were talking about the roadway, and now and I'm reading it carefully, it looks like we're not actually going to worry about security fences, but it did occur when I first read it that a barbed wire fence within 1 meter of the road, now that the road is a property line, would affect a security fence, but it does say so long as no one's getting injured from it. My comment really more is a case of when the Stafford Street issue, that one that came up on Lower Stafford Street and a heritage building refit, was in some respects, I have a feeling it came forward because of the way we were literally interpreting the bylaw at the time. And I'm hoping that in situations where we have heritage building refits, and specifically only that particular issue, that we can show enough latitude in our interpretation of it that we make sure we end up with good outcomes for both safety and for those people doing that work. Otherwise, we're not going to have two inconsistent policies at place here, because we're trying to get the heritage buildings done up, and then where we can't modify them, we're saying that you weren't compliant with our road bylaw. So My only feedback really is I hope that by changing those definitions at the front, we haven't changed the intent of the bylaw or anywhere in the middle of it, and that when we rule on the bylaw or make rulings from it, that we do use common sense as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Benson Pope, your right of reply. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 11. Request for council support for Otago Museum's Crown Infrastructure Partners funding application. Now, acknowledging that a number of us are on the governing of Otago Museum, Ms. Graham, I wondered if it would be helpful to get some general advice about whether we are compromised or not in this circumstance.
I intend to sit back, Your Worship.
Thank you. Noted.
So the advice from the Auditor General's Office says it depends on the nature of the interest that exists for people who are on in council appointed roles on independent bodies. In this case, because this is simply requesting support, the museum board requesting support of council with no real implication for council as the parent body itself, and reading their guidance, that would indicate that members are free to participate if they choose.
Thank you.
No, in my declaration of interest, it was changed, and I've submitted that to the GSOs earlier. Changed for this meeting.
Okay.
It's not relevant to the museum, but I thought I needed to introduce it at some point.
Thank you. I'll take guidance between now and the end of this meeting how we deal with that in that because those resolutions passed in terms of not amending it, but that would meet the test of new information coming to light, at which point we could move a revocation motion.
Yeah.
I can do that now if that's easier.
Whatever suits, but yes, the Councillor Raddick sought advice from me because he was frozen when that item was considered, and I provided advice during the adjournment to him. So,
okay. How about we'll tidy up this museum thing, Councillor Raddick, and then we can deal with it after that. Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Your Worship. I had a question, and I'm very supportive of us supporting the application. But I note, and it's not the first time I've noted this, on page 150, and it's the section number 22, it talks about loosening stringent regulatory and cost requirements around building and resource consents. I just wanted to ask CEO Bidrose if this would trigger, a project like this would trigger a red carpet approach.
I would anticipate so.
Okay, so that would help with speed.
Well, certainly somebody to hold their hand and make sure the process goes smoothly through, particularly also given the timeframes, and given they're a partner, they would tend to get a bit of a case managed approach. Sure.
Thank you.
You're on mute. No more questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Oh, Councillor Houlihan, do you have a question? Sorry, Councillor. No. Are you moving the motion? Perfect. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Elder. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Houlihan?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think we have a brilliant asset in our Otago Museum, so I fully support this, and I hope that the government comes on board and they get some funding to do these projects.
Excellent. And with no speakers to reply to, your right of reply becomes superfluous. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against?
Aye.
That's agreed. Thank you. Item 12, Dunedin City Council submission to the Otago Regional Annual Plan 2020/21. The first of a few retrospective approvals of submissions to various government agencies and select committees. Any staff comment in advance of this?
No, we're happy to take it as read.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Benson Pope.
Just a question in relation to paragraph 29. I think this is a really good submission and it covers the water quality issue extensively. And I'm particularly pleased at the mention of the coastal marine area, because that the lack of monitoring, independent monitoring, is a major failing in our wider community. I didn't see it anywhere else, and I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate to add food gathering, even retrospectively, into paragraph 29, where it talks about uses of the CMA. If it's traversed somewhere else in the submission, that's fine, but otherwise, I don't think it's quite complete enough to talk about swimming, surfing, and boating without talking about the Hinga Kai.
The other option we have, Councillor, is that we can expand upon that point when presenting the submission.
I'd be quite happy with that. That'd be fine.
Okay.
If people agree.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to acknowledge the paragraphs 34 and 35 around the Tomahawk Lagoon, and I'm glad to see that was mentioned, and also around the lack of funding since the 2 workshops in 2018. Plus also when we go to paragraph 39 about the coastal erosion and monitoring and funding for more work around that space. So I thought overall it was a good submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this point? Councillor Gary?
Yes, Your Worship. I wondered if it would be possible when it comes to being heard on the submission, if we could expand on item 46. I was really surprised to find that the harbour, as far as I could tell, wasn't really covered in the proposed annual plan for the ORC. And they've certainly made progress, but there has been work done in partnership with ORC to date. But there continues, as I understand it, to be more work to be done, particularly around harbour edge matters, and wonder if that could be, if people are in agreement, expanded on in the verbal submission.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we need the approval of the meeting to expand upon material that is in the whole purpose of turning up and speaking to it is exactly expanding upon what it is we've written. It's only really necessary, I think, if we are adding stuff, whether it's the Mahika Kai issue raised earlier or others, but I can do that, Councillor Gary, when we're presenting the submission. Councillor Elder.
Thank you. A question I have is around the South Dunedin work with the Regional Council, the City Council and GNS Science. There's no mention of that in there as I see it, and whether we should be, mentioning the ongoing work that is being done there and for their continued investment in it in partnership.
Further questions? No. Would someone like to move? I'm happy to move the submission with the addition of the Mahika Kai matter that Councillor Benson raised. Seconded, Councillor Lord. Don't wish to speak to it at this point. Councillor Walker.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for the submission. I just want to applaud the inclusion of section of paragraph 9 of the submission, and just point out, even when the cruise ship market returns, there will likely remain, unfortunately, a lasting association between the cruise ship market and COVID-19, which I'd imagine is likely going to result in a level of public reticence related to welcoming ships back. I think, as many people know, there's been continuing concerns amongst many Port Chalmers residents for many years related to the noxious emissions emanating from berth cruise ships at Port Chalmers, the consequences of which are unknown, but speculation as to the adverse effects it does remain rife. If cruise ships are to be welcomed back at some point hence, it is incumbent, if not on them, the cruise ships themselves, that the ORC, as the owner of Port Otago, is seen to be proactively putting the health and welfare of the citizens out here and actually in the wider Dunedin area front and centre. I don't think it should be any longer the case that we harp on and on about the economic upsides of the or the economic benefits of the cruise ship markets, while ignoring the detrimental health effects that they have on the ratepayers while they're berthed at Port Chalmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Vis.
I note that Councillor Walker has talked about when the cruise ships return. I think it would be more appropriate to note if they return, because I don't believe that a lot of what tourism was able to achieve in terms of monies for Dunedin in the past will actually return and be available in the future. But speaking particularly to the ORC submission, I appreciate that some of the expanding budgets and suggestions for addition have been moderated a bit, but I still see throughout this whole submission a call for more monitoring, increased resourcing, all kinds of extra spending at a time when there is not going to be any budget for extra spending. And worse than that, these calls for extra spending are all for doing things which don't actually materially help anything. Just monitoring pollution doesn't actually reduce it. We know that it's there. We have a pretty good idea of what the sources are, but putting enormous amounts of extra resource into extra monitoring, which is the thrust of most of these submissions to the ORC. I think, first of all, it's pretentious of us to tell the ORC how to do their job. It's somewhat, I think, kind of unfair for us to actually say the ORC should be doing more of this kind of monitoring as opposed to that kind of monitoring. If we had any specific submission points which would actually benefit the environment, as an increased monitoring it, I could support this. But as it is, I don't see any direct benefits. I don't see any direct work that's actually going to improve levels. And I can see a whole lot of extra cost in expanding budgets for monitoring. And for that reason, unfortunately, I still have to vote against. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Worship. I wanted to speak to item 29, which is around the monitoring, and just say that this has been an issue that I can remember back when I was on the community board. It was an issue for the Peninsula community as an example around health and safety, because there was a variety of ways that was reported. I fully support the inclusion of the cruise ship item in the submission. And as I mentioned in the questions, I was pleased to see the addition of item 48 around the harbour edge. 46. This issue has been a very long-standing one. Again, I recall back to community board days and advocating for harbour edge communities 5 years in a row. And there's been great progress made on this matter. The appointment of a harbour master, navigational markers being upgraded, but the dredging of the Eastern Channel is one outstanding item. Around the harbour edge, we've got businesses, community groups, but of real importance is the public access and the potential to connect communities, and particularly with the completion of the Peninsula Connection in sight and the shared pathway on State Highway 88. This is of real relevance. So this is not necessarily about spending more money. This is about a shared understanding and a strong, focused response to harbour edge issues, which have been fraught in the past, but I am confident that we'll move forward strongly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Sorry, I had a brain fade about the South Dunedin things. I think Zoomies takes their toll on you somewhat. My comment was about the amendment that I added to this submission, and that is, given the ORC has a responsibility for planning the transport system by connecting communities, and in line with the government priorities of mode shift, the DCC will work with the ORC to advance safe shared paths to our communities, because in fact there's a huge will to get the Caversham and the Chain Hills Tunnel and biking right through to Mosgiel as a commuter, safe commuter route for both Green Island, Fairfield and Mosgiel. And one of the mandates of the Regional Council is the main highways and connecting communities. And I see this as an opportunity for us to take up, and also for Waikawaiti to Dunedin. Those communities have expressed a real desire to be able to, for example, if you're in Warrington, bike to the library, etc., and bike to town, which is made imminently possible, as Steve Walker knows, with electric bikes. So I think for a Connecting Dunedin project as well, it's certainly something that we haven't actually, well, we've worked with the ORC for the Port Chalmers to Dunedin, but extending that work is a great potential, particularly with the infrastructure fund coming up, whether there's potential to do something with that. I think also the environmental work, which is a key part of the Regional Council. I think strengthening the biodiversity and some of the other work around that is really important as well. And the urban water courses, we ask the farmers to clean up their water, but we have to clean up our own. So yeah, I fully support this, and yeah. I'm sorry about that fade on South Dunedin.
Is that me, Your Worship?
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. I just want to make sure it was me. To the point of monitoring, when you're trying to work out cause and effect, you have to have underlying data to support what you think you're seeing. And if we don't do longitudinal monitoring, then we don't know what we're looking at. And any data that's collected on our sensitive waterways or any of the waterways we're looking at will help us as well in terms of things such as our planning and our land use activities, as well as just looking at the water itself. Who's the customer and who is the provider here? The Otago Regional Council plays an environmental role inside our territorial area, so I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to have an opinion on what we would like them to do as they fulfill that role inside our territorial area. So otherwise, what's the point of submissions, really, in many respects? So I support the request for increased monitoring. I think we do need to know more, and I think it's appropriate that we ask them to perform it because that's their role. Thank you.
Councillor Reddick.
Just a brief comment. That it's an old business adage that what gets measured gets managed. So I echo the words of then
the collective collective furrowed brows suggests to me that I wasn't the only person who was struggling to pick that up, Councillor. It seems like a bandwidth issue. You can have another crack at it if you like.
Okay, does that sound any clearer at this moment?
That's better, yeah.
Okay. It's an old business adage that what gets measured gets. And so I
It was it was a stronger start, but a similar finish. Unfortunately, and I don't know if trying the same thing a third time will necessarily get us a better outcome. Apologies from all of us here at Gigatown. Any further speakers at this point? But just in closing, I want to speak in support of Councillor O'Malley's comments and what I am interpreting Councillor Raddick's comments to have been based on how he started that, and that, you know, the regional council's one of, if not their primary function, is environmental monitoring and regulation. And so it is entirely understandable that we would desire of them to step up their monitoring program, long overdue that it is, because it makes it difficult then to argue for improvements to be made to environmental outcomes when you don't have the data to prove that that is necessary. And while that may be convenient for some affected parties, I don't think is an excuse for them to continue to abrogate their responsibilities. And I welcome the increased desire from the regional council at a political level to remedy this and include that work. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against?
Aye.
That's agreed. Thank you. Item 13, the Dunedin City Council's submission on the Residential Tenancy Act Amendment Bill. Ms. Graham, Mr. Bainbridge Zafar, joining us from the start. Again, a submission presented to Council for retrospective approval. Our options are at this point effectively approving it or withdrawing it. But does staff have any context they wish to add at this point?
We do not.
Shaking their heads, that's fine. Questions, Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I have a few issues with this, and I'm delighted that our council is submitting on this amendment bill. Being a student town that we are, there are quite a few issues that are raised in this, in these changes that are proposed that could cause serious problems for landlords in the student area. For example, not being able to. And one of them is addressed here, which I'm really pleased we have, about difficulties getting rid of tenants that and no one wants to get rid of a good tenant. You know, no landlord wants to do that. However, some of the provisions and the changes that are proposed are so tough. So I think what we've put here to say is a very fair and reasonable thing. And I think it's good for the council. Maybe the question is, maybe the council could look at, and perhaps it has already, but looking at talking to the university and maybe putting a submission in with them as well, or leaning that way, because I know the university and perhaps the property investors have some issues with this too. So, and just consulting a bit further to see the issues for our city, so that we don't ruin the brilliant atmosphere we already have around, particularly that student quarter.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I noticed in the explanation note that talks about on page 181, it says, while appropriately balancing the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords. And then when in the DCC submission on paragraph 3, it says, while also balancing the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords. Yet when we look in now on page 174, and we look at a background, it goes on about force over 30 years ago and rebalance the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords. So I'm trying to work out where the rebalance came from in the background.
The submission was drafted with my input in line with existing council policy. We knew that it wasn't going to come to council for sign off, and so all we could do was reiterate and it's largely through the housing action plan work, which was adopted by wholesale by council in the last triennium. But there's nothing, as far as I'm aware, and I stand to be corrected, that is inconsistent with that piece of work in this submission.
No, the submission is appropriate and says it talks about balancing the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords. But in the background and in the introduction of on page 174, I'm just going back to where it says and rebalance the rights and obligations of tenants and landlords. So I'm trying to work out where we got the rebalance the rights.
I didn't write that part of the paper, so I can't answer that question for you. And I don't know if staff are easily capable of doing it. I do note that it doesn't affect the submission we are making, and so it's probably immaterial at this point, but we can take that on notice, Councillor, and get you an answer in due course, if that's helpful. Thanks. Further questions? Being none, I'll move the recommendations per the order paper, seconded Councillor Gary. Would anyone like to speak to it? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's agreed. Thank you. Item 14. Local Government Rating of Whenua Māori Amendment Bill submission. Dr. Bidrose is speaking to this report. Welcome.
Mr. Logie is joining us as well, Your Worship.
Welcome, Gavin.
So this one was circulated and feedbacks were received and taken on board by the policy team as they pulled this one together.
And my apologies, I've forgotten that the deadline for this has been extended, and this isn't, as per the last two, a retrospective submission. So would council to bear in mind to amend it, they would be welcome to do that. Questions, Councillor Mandevers? You're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry, putting my hand up was for the last item, which has been missed, but I don't need time on this item. Thank you.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Questions around this paper then? Councillor, use the button if you would, but Councillor Lord, I see you there. You're on mute, Councillor. I'll take care of that for you.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I think it might have been 3 or 4 years ago, we had an elderly married gentleman from up around sort of Cherry Farm, that area, and he came to us with an issue where he had some Maori land that was in his farm. It was completely surrounded by another farm, so he didn't have road access to it to drive stock to it. He didn't want to have stock on it. It was retired land, but he just came to see if there could be any exemptions. And I don't see specifically in the, I didn't see specifically in our submission that we've necessarily covered that, but that may have been, I may have missed it in the document before, but have we effectively supported that?
I can't be sure which chap you're referring to. There's been a couple that I've dealt with that would be covered by these changes. So in terms of land that is unusable and not going to be used, being able to be exempt from rates.
So that is covered.
Well, I can't swear it. You'll have to give me that chap and then we'll follow up. I can go back and have a look, but the couple that I dealt with, I think it would.
I can't remember his name, but I think Gavin and Maria were there and a number of others, so I'm sure it will be covered. But thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. If I recall correctly, that was there was a separate discussion around what our specific policy was, because the law says we have to have a policy, but our policy at that point was we don't have one, and that satisfied the needs, and subsequently have gone back and done that work. Mr. Logie is nodding. So those concerns that were addressed at that point, well, again, without much certainty around who your chap is, but
yeah, I can't remember his name, but yeah.
Councillor Elder.
Hi, I was just asking a question about this. The improvements to this, does this enable, because Māori land is often owned by the whole hapu or tribe, more freedom within more freedom for them to do things with land that is owned commonly rather than just by one person?
Do you want to talk to that, Hawani? But yes, my understanding is yes, that's part of the driver for this bill, which Te Puni Kōkiri have worked on extensively.
Yes, that's also my understanding of the bill, but I can go and come over the legislation to check around that communal ownership piece.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I think the one that Mike was referring to, I think that was settled by the rates were wiped on the bit of land, and it wasn't rateable because it was inaccessible. I can't think of the judge's name, but I can remember going through. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were issues around things like they had to technically abandon it to qualify, and there were cultural issues around abandoning your whenua, etc. Councillor Vandervis, your hand is just still errantly up from previous, or do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question regarding unusable land that can't be used, and the discretion that we have to permanently waive rates. Does this apply only to our land, or does it apply to unusable land, to waive rates for any unusable land?
If staff caught enough of that to answer it, they could.
This bill applies to Māori land.
I know this bill applies to it. The question was regarding our ability to waive rates in the case of unusable land that can't be used. Do we also have the ability to waive rates for non-Māori land that is similarly unusable?
Sorry, I've got the remission policy here. I'd have to go through it. I can't specifically answer that question, Councillor. I'd have to dig into that. Sorry.
Good. Can we get an email circulated with an answer to that question?
Yep. Can do.
Looking forward. Thank you, Gavin. Cheers.
No further questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations?
Yeah, I'll move it.
Move Councillor O'Malley, seconded Councillor Hall. Thank you. I would like to speak to it, Councillor O'Malley.
Just briefly to say that, you know, the country's going through a very long journey for which one side, the Crown, did not start the journey well, and that every step we make is towards improvement. There's still some more distance to go, but many of the things in this Act start to address the differences that were there on the day that the treaty was signed, and I think that it's a positive step forward.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I just wanted to say years ago, like going back quite a while ago now, probably over 20 years ago, I'm showing my age, one of my rounds as a journalist used to be Māori reporting, and I did quite a few stories around some issues with this, and it's been an ongoing issue for iwi and hapu and runaka, and I think if it can be improved for the generations forward, it's a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Your right of reply, Councillor O'Malley. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. And apologies, it's taken us this long. Councillor Reddick.
Yes.
I believe you have something for us before we close out the meeting.
Declaration of interest, yes.
Yeah.
So my declaration of interest has changed. Not in substance, but I suppose in meaning, because I do have property on George Street. So when it comes to matters of George Street, I would sit back from discussions and voting.
Thank you for that fresh information that has been brought to light that allows us to revoke our earlier decision that we went through in one of your frozen periods. So with that, I'll move that council amend the elected members' interest register, amends the proposed management plan for elected members. Seconded, Councillor Gary.
Your worship, if I may, sorry, you need to revoke that earlier resolution before you make your new one.
That was my question earlier. So,
yes,
fine. So I'll move that we revoke the declaration of interest resolution from earlier in the meeting. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Various thresholds appear to be satisfied. And further, we'll move that council amend the elected members' interest register and amends the proposed management plan and notes the staff members' interest register. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That is agreed. That's the end of the public part of the meeting. I'll move, as per the order paper, for the reasons explained, that we move into non-public session. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. We can